can you give me your overall opinion and analysis of the Black Lives Matter movement, and tell me what you see as their motivating worldview and ideology?
Sure. Black Lives Matter, which I have renamed Black Lies, Lies Matter, it's nothing more than an astroturf operation. It's just the latest shallow, disguised confederation, if you will, of community organizers and leftists that specialize in fostering disorganization and rebellion in ghettos and other struggling areas throughout the United States of America. This is a political construct. This group, Black Lives, doesn't care any more about the lives of black people than the Ku Klux Klan, and I mean that. I'm waiting for the Southern Poverty Law Center to designate Black Lives as a hate group, because that's what they are. These are nothing more than riot makers, and they stoke up bitterness and resentment in people, and they use the police as a distraction from the staggering failure of liberal politicians in these large urban areas where these ghettos are contained. And I thought it was a really sad chapter in the history of America when, after the riots in Ferguson, Missouri, this political construct of anarchists, by the way, the same mindset that created the Black Panther Party in the 60s, that was created by the Students for a Democratic Society. The Black Panther Party was not created by black people. And like I said, they were used as riot starters by this anarchist movement who are trying to weaken our institutions of government so that they can, create chaos in doing that. And then when these institutions, like police, become so weak, then they no longer have the nerve, if you will, to enforce the law, and then everything kind of falls apart. And that's what we're seeing in these ghettos right now with this rise in crime and violence. And that's why I said they don't care anymore about the lives of struggling black people than the Ku Klux Klan. So, you have this political construct that's developed, and it really turned out to be a get out the vote and a voter registration drive for the Democrat Party, or at least that's what the Democrat Party thought. They didn't start this movement, but they looked and said, hey, here's an opportunity for us over here coming into the general election in 2016 to enrage and energize black people to come out and vote for us. That's a model they've been using for a long time. The real, the thing that gets me the most, if you just look at the city of Chicago. Let's just isolate on one city, the city of Chicago. If you look at the violence that's going on in Chicago, it resembles that of some war-torn sub-Sahara African nation that's constantly under civil war with a tribal mentality. Just this last weekend, 12 dead, 43 wounded in shootings in the great city of Chicago on Father's Day. It is like that every single weekend. They've had about 1,700 non-fatal shootings since January 1st, 2016, and they're approaching, they may be over it now, the barrier, the 300 people killed in the first, not even the first 6 months of the year. Where does Black Lives Matter? If they cared about the lives of black people, they would be marching against the liberal establishment in these large urban areas and demanding a better quality of life and a better way of life. But no, that's not what they're doing. They're instead using the police as a straw man when they don't have, they meaning Black Lives, they don't have one iota of evidence or research to show that the American police officer, the white American police officer, uses force in any higher rates than against any other demographic. As a matter of fact, I should correct myself on that. In a study done by Dr. Timothy Johnson at Toledo University, and I think he looked between the years of 2010 and 2014, more white males were killed in police use of force than black males or category of other, Hispanic, Asian, whatever, and it wasn't even close. White males by 2-to-1 ratio versus black males are killed in police use of force situations. And so that's just one example. The Washington Post, none other than the Washington Post, did a study on police use of force, hoping to find some evidence that what these black racialists are spewing, that it was true. And in fact, and I give them credit, I don't give them credit a lot, the Washington Post, the liberal mainstream media in general, but I give them credit for coming out and showing what they found. They could have buried it, and they didn't. And they found that there was no evidence to suggest that white cops used force against black males than any other demographic. And so when you just put all this together, and you look at the violence and the murder going on in Chicago, black-on-black crime, by the way, white police officers are not killing those folks or shooting those folks in the great city of Chicago. Other black males are. So when you look at all that and you put this all together, that's why I said this movement is a fraud. It is the bastard child of the Hands Up, Don't Shoot, which is really the initial name of this group was Hands Up, Don't Shoot. The lie that came out of the Ferguson police shooting when Officer Darren Wilson of the Ferguson Police Department had to defend his life when he was trying to be disarmed by Mike Brown. So I could go on and on and on. I could do a lecture for several hours to demonstrate the fraudulent nature that this organization or this movement, it's not an organization, that this movement is. And I'm going to continue to do that.
And what do you think is their ultimate goal? What do they want to, if they could have exactly what they want, what are they trying to accomplish? Like, what's their ultimate aim?
Well, it's, their ultimate goal is to try to extract from, government, things that they have not earned. Okay, so you might say political power. They're looking for money. They're looking for, like I said, things that they have not earned, and they're trying to do it by force, by threats, by rioting, and other, I think, tawdry tactics. They specialize in intimidation. Like I said, they stoke up racial discord, and it's really about power, and it's really about money, but it's extortion attempt at something that they did not earn.
Okay, and how do you think Black Lives Matter's narrative has impacted the law enforcement profession and American police officers individually? And also, do you believe that there is a problem with police brutality against Black America? And do you agree with any aspects of Black Lives Matter movement? And then why or why not?
Well, let's kind of dissect that a little bit. First of all, no, I don't believe and I don't support anything that this fraudulent movement proposes. No, there isn't. I give you one scenario with the Dr. Timothy Johnson. I could name you others. Not off the top of my head, I don't have it in front of me, but I have in a lot of places that I've gone to speak. The research. There is no research. There is not one bit of research or data that supports their lie, which is why I call them black lies. Their lie about police use of force in the United States of America. Now let me zero in on this term brutality, and I do this whenever I hear it. I looked up the definition of brutality, so I could get a working definition. I knew what it's somewhat it's a form of brutal, but I wanted to get a working definition. And the definition that I found in dictionary.com, it says savage physical violence. Let me give you some examples of savage physical violence. ISIS engages in savage physical violence by cutting off the heads of live human beings and videotaping it and putting it out on the internet. That is savage physical violence. Putting somebody in a cage, like ISIS has done, pouring gasoline around it and setting it on fire is savage physical violence. What Planned Parenthood was accused of doing late last year or earlier this year, cutting up fetuses into parts and selling them on the open market to the highest bidder is savage physical violence. What we're talking about with the police is not savage physical violence. It's a police use of force. And it's a use of force, a very awesome power, by the way, and it should be scrutinized. But it is an option that police officers can use in the rarest of situations to defend their life or the life of somebody else. So I don't let people get away with calling it police brutality. That, and I'm not accusing you of this, but that term is used, like I said, to enrage and to excite people who have not, either haven't taken the time or don't have the ability to sort things out like I just did. It's not brutality. It's police use of force. And the data and research is on my side that the police do not use that type of force in higher numbers against blacks than they do against whites. As a matter of fact, the opposite is true. So I'm trying to go back to some of the other things that you asked in that last question, but no, this is a fraudulent movement. And this movement, here's another thing that you mentioned, has it had an impact, a negative impact on policing? Definitely. Look at how the crime rates have skyrocketed in Baltimore, in Milwaukee, in Chicago, in L.A., and other large major urban areas where you have high concentrations of black population. The violence has spiked. It is not a little uptick. It is a spike. With these cities experiencing, record numbers in terms of violence, crime and violence rates. So sure, it has had a negative impact because what has happened, unlike in the past when war was declared on the American police officer, because this is nothing new. The last time we saw it was in the 60s. But the difference between now and in the 60s is the political class supported the police during that time that this anarchist movement declared war on the police. This time, you fast forward to now, and the political class has sided with this disgusting movement. And what law enforcement officers are doing right now is they're not engaging in the type of assertive policing that we need that keeps crime and violence in check. Assertive policing is the best policing, the best tactic you can use to keep the criminals on their heels. Stuff like stop, question, and frisk is assertive policing. You can't make officers go out and engage in things like traffic stops and other high-risk stops to conduct an investigation based on reasonable suspicion. That's the law standard. And, you hope that they do that. They have to answer the 911 call. But right now, what their mindset is, if I go and pull this car over, there's a traffic violation, but I'm looking inside that car, and this car may mean trouble, and something may go horribly wrong. I may have to use force, and then the next thing you know, I'll be the next Darren Wilson. Nobody wants to become the next Darren Wilson in the policing profession. So what do? Well, I'll just let that traffic stop go. Or I see these guys hanging on the corner. I know this is an area notorious for drug dealing. Okay, that's called reasonable suspicion. It's that time of day. You've looked at police reports in your beat area, and, they fit the demographic, young black males, whatever, and, not solely black males, but you look at the age range, you look at height and weight clothing, and you look at the complaints you're getting from the people in the area. All this forms your reasonable suspicion to go over and make that stop of those individuals hanging out on the corner. Based on all of that information, did you know that people who engage in this type of activity, drug dealing, often go armed? The law allows you to do a pat-down search for weapons. Here's what you're going to find in that assertive policing tactic. You're going to find people wanted on serious felony warrants that you can get off the street. You're going to find weapons. You're going to find large amounts of drugs. You're going to clear a lot of crimes based on suspect descriptions, based on good interrogations. That's what that stuff does. But the cop right now is feeling, they're not afraid to do their job. What they're afraid of is the United States Department of Justice and their jackbooted goon lawyers at the Civil Rights Division who have the American police officer in their crosshairs. We're used to a United States Department of Justice that saw us as allies in the pursuit of justice and in the pursuit of criminals. Right now, The U.S. DOJ Civil Rights Division sees the American police officer as the enemy, and they see the criminals as victims. So that's causing police to use less of this assertive policing, which, like I said, is your best policing. It keeps crime and violence in check, and as a result, we're seeing these skyrocketing instances of criminal behavior.
Okay, and I also wanted to ask you about Black Lives Matter's response to the Orlando terrorist attack. I just read an article about this that went up yesterday, and I quoted Black Lives Matter from their own response. They said, quote, "Despite the media's framing of this as a terrorist attack, we are very clear that this terror is completely homegrown, born from the anti-black, white supremacy, patriarchy, and homophobia of the conservative right, and of those who would use religious extremism as a weapon to gain power for the few and take power from the rest," end quote. So what do you think about Black Lives Matter's analysis of this Orlando terror attack? And also, what do you think about the media and some politicians who are blaming conservatives and calling for gun control in the aftermath of the attack?
Well, this is just the typical garbage that goes on after incidents like this. And that's why I said these people are sick. They know there isn't one piece of that that's true, but they don't care about the truth. So they don't sit down and say, well, let's put something factual together here that's based on any sort of us looking into the situation and listening. And no, they just say, what can we do to exploit this situation? It's the same thing, Alex, that they did in Ferguson, Missouri. It's the same thing they did in Baltimore, Maryland. It's the same thing they did in New York with the Eric Garner situation. Those are all tragic situations. They exploited it. They came out. Why do you think I've termed them Black Lives Matter? Every word that you read to me there is a lie. This is what they do. They exploit. They specialize in demagoguery. They specialize in propaganda, knowing, you know why they do this? Knowing that the liberal mainstream media is going to pick up on it. The fact that you even reported that, and I'm not suggesting that conservative journalists and conservative news sources didn't report this, but they reported it as more of a listen to this garbage, whereas the mainstream media reports it as, I think this is something we need to have a conversation about when we don't. So we know exactly, everybody knows exactly what the Orlando nightclub, I think the name was Pulse. We know what that was about, radical Islamic terrorism. But one of the things that people do when they use propaganda, because this movement, they're not real good at it, but they have some idea of the effect that propaganda plays in terms of a narrative, developing a narrative in terms of an argument and discourse. And so they know that like I said, that the liberal mainstream media will pick up on it, but they're aware that there are a lot of individuals in this country who don't watch the news every day, who don't do critical thinking on their own, who don't peel back the layers when they hear something like some garbage like this and then find out later that there's no truth to it, like hands up, don't shoot. People peel back the layers and found out that was a lie, and so then they had to change their name. So, they come up with some nonsense like this just to exploit the situation. This is what they specialize in. They're not good at it, but this is what they specialize in.
All right. And I was going to ask you about your overall analysis of the media coverage of Black Lives Matter, but I think you've already mentioned that. Do you have anything else you want to add to that?
It's been pathetic, because the mainstream, the liberal mainstream media, they know better. These are people who can critically think, but they're on a political agenda as well. To sit up there and allow themselves to be used as the propaganda machine for these sycophants. That's what's disgusting to me, that the liberal mainstream media was given First Amendment protection. It wasn't liberal at the time, but the media was given First Amendment protection for a reason. We didn't want government controlling the media. But what has happened is, over time, the media has sold out their responsibility to be that government watchdog. That's why they were given First Amendment protection, and they've instead become the propaganda wing or the propaganda machine of the Democrat Party. So they're now heavily steeped into politics, and because of it, they cannot objectively report stuff. They have to do it with a slant or with a bias, and I think that's a shame because America depends on the media to get their news, but when their news is slanted and biased, then you have to read it with a very critical eye, and a lot of people can't do that.
And so, if you could sit down with Americans that agree with you, what would you ask them to do to support police officers and to combat Black Lives Matter, Occupy Wall Street, and all this sort of stuff that's going on the left?
Well, I wouldn't have to tell them anything because we already have the overwhelming support of the people in our communities. Rasmussen just put out a poll recently, and this is the latest one that they've taken last week. And the support for the police nationwide is at about 56, 57% right now, up from 52% a year ago last year. If we didn't have the support of the people in our communities, we couldn't be as successful as we are, even under these difficult circumstances in terms of keeping crime and violence in check. But what I would ask them to do is this, to become more vocal, to become as vocal as Black Lives Matter and some of these other anarchist groups, to show up at rallies, to write, use social media, to, take to the blogs and some of these other forms of, these alternative forms of media, and become your own media person, become your own journalist. Because there's just a segment of America that's very, what should I call it? They don't critically think. And it's not that they're stupid. They're not stupid at all. But they don't have the time for this. They don't engage in it, the political discourse or the political arena. And so there's subject to a lot of propaganda. But you have to have a counter-narrative to shoot that crap down so that it doesn't become the dominant narrative. And then after a while, the myth becomes, in some people's eyes, the truth. So there is a role, but really the only thing I'd tell them to do is be more vocal about it. They do it silently, but in this day and age, you can't afford to do things silent anymore.